Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Canadian Bowler channel. Not the show, but the channel. I am Darryl Fitzgerald. I am 1/3 of the hosting group that does the Canadian Bowler podcast. I want to welcome everybody today to a special show, a Q&A on the 2024 Canadian Championship changes. With me today are Mees, Jake Schuknecht, Rob Law, Tammy Foster-Veinot, and Ryan Stadnyk. This will be your panel today for the Q&A. I will be the moderator. I will try to ask pertinent questions to all the stuff that's been on your minds and in the chats of the various social media threads. And I will also try to monitor chat so we can get your questions live as well. So thank you for tuning in. Hopefully you get all the information that you need. And we will kick it off right now. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Hey, Darryl.
Hi, Darryl.
So to kick things off, I'm just going to ask Anna, can you give us a quick intro as to basically why we're here? The 2024 Canadian changes to the championships, and why I guess you wanted to do the Q&A and lead us off.
Sounds great. First of all, Darryl, thank you so much for the invitation to come and be part of the Canadian Bowler channel. Your work is great, and I know you reach a lot of people, so it's awesome to have the opportunity to say hi to everybody across Canada and to answer a lot of those questions that certainly have been circulating in clubs, provinces, and on social media. So how did we get here? Essentially, it was a perfect storm of change that was happening over the last decade. We predicted something like this could happen as early as 2016. And at that point, we did bring together a large group to look at championship revisions. Essentially, what really got us to a place of wanting to put in some visionary change and to really look for some innovation in the game was a recognition that over the last couple of championships, we've been seeing a real decline in entries. And you can see that with the number of B teams that have been required to fill out a championship event. Additionally, we're seeing real difficulty attracting hosts for 7 national championships, and this has been getting more severe with each passing year, to the point where it's impossible, I will say, to attract a host more than a year in advance. And often, we're seeing that we can't get a host for our different events within the year of the event itself. So that's been really difficult. Financially, 7 championships were spread really thin. This means that at a national level, it's really difficult to invest in any single event the way it needs to be invested in, whether that's investing in greens, streaming, equipment. It's been really difficult. And I think probably where I say the perfect storm is the impact of a global pandemic that has been coming out, and the effects that are lingering from that, resulting especially in an economy that's seen costs in areas of accommodation, airfare, meals, ground transportation, increase dramatically. This has meant that costs to the individual bowler, whether it's going to play downs, to come to the national championships, costs for hosts to run the event, costs in catering, costs for the nationals. Change was needed. And this was a great opportunity for us to sit back and say, where do we want to be in 10 years? And what is the vision that we want for bowls in Canada?
Perfect. Thank you for that intro, Anna. I'll throw this one off to Rob Law. Rob, how did we progress from 7 events just down to 1?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a big change, but I think what it really came down to is we wanted to create a championship when we sat down as a group that had prestige, and was something that was exciting and brought in and showcased so much about what our sport is. And that goes beyond just having a bunch of national championships, but bringing a community together and showing that. So ultimately, this kind of reflected being able to consolidate, do less better. Every time we say yes to something, we're saying no to something else. And I think that this change ultimately reflects that we're able to be so much more as a sport, and we'll be able to make some really great marketable assets, having everyone there and bringing a big community to a certain area of Canada and showcasing what our sport has to offer in one big festival event.
Jake, the indoors seem to be progressing. Manitoba got gold, Ontario got bronze, just most recently. Why is it being removed now?
So Anna mentioned earlier in her intro that we're being spread a little too thin. And so when we look at the indoor recently, the past number of years, the qualification process made it challenging to say that this was truly a national championship when we had less than 5 provinces, sometimes less than 4 provinces attending, which is unfortunate, but I'm hopeful that we'll be able to bring this event back in the future and really grow the indoor. If you look at our strategic plan, which is on our website, part of our 4-year plan going forward is to grow the indoor. So it's not goodbye forever, but when we look at how we can do less better, cutting this event for now for the short term, just so that we can really invest our time, our resources on making our current national championships better, is where we're going for at least 2024.
And for everybody in the chat, if you're looking for information on the championships, if you haven't quite read everything, there are links in the description of this video. You can go and take a look now if you want to on all the changes that are being discussed right now. So Anna, with all the changes that are being made and the potential savings, where are all the savings from the reduction of the championships offered being redirected? Can we expect some increased subsidies or help to provinces?
That's a really great question, Darryl. So one of the things that people don't realize is how the funding at a national level works. So when we start to look at how different projects are funded, for example, high performance versus national championships versus a program like Belonging in Bowls or Just Roll With It, those all come from different pots of money. So when we look at something like high performance, that is primarily funded through Sport Canada or federal government funding, as well as the fees that the players themselves pay to contribute to the cost of the program. When we look at something like the national championships, that a small amount of Sport Canada funding was able to go to that event. But primarily the majority of the funding for that event came from membership fees and entry fees. So when we look at 7 national championships, on average, not counting 2022, which was arguably an outstandingly expensive year for everybody because of the impacts of the pandemic. But when we look at the past few years, on average, BCB spends between $80,000 and $100,000 across the 7 national championships. But we only bring in between $35,000 and $37,000 of entry fees. So that's a significant gap to be made up. So in some cases, we're really fortunate. We can tap into a local hosting grant. Sometimes that grant comes to Bowls Canada, but more often than not, that a local hosting grant from a provincial government goes directly to the host. So when we start to look at the fact that there's that significant gap between expenses and revenues, there isn't a lot of saving, there isn't a lot of extra money floating around. So when we start to look at, well, if we invest in a single event, then that means that we can really start to put money into showcasing that event. So for example, I'm sure a number of people on this stream have probably experienced frustration when trying to watch a stream of a national championship. So at the moment, we cannot invest. We do not have the funds to invest in the type of equipment that is required to produce a quality stream. So that would be one area right off the top. Another area where we'd be looking to invest is obviously in the host club itself. When players come to an event, it's important that they have the highest quality player experience. And we know our host clubs do their absolute best. And, we can't be more thankful for the quality of the hosts that we've had, but it's really expensive for that club to invest in their greens. So that's something that a national championship should be looking to do, is to help them to make sure that that is going to be not only a legacy for that year for those club members, but also a great surface for the players at that event. But the big winner, Darryl, are really the membership programs. So programs like Belonging in Bowls that are looking to help clubs grow volunteers, to recruit and to retain. So programs like that we see with Bowls Day, trying to really grow that marketing, actually investing, being able to invest in a marketing program that's going to promote the whole game across Canada to attract new Canadians or new bowlers to come, Canadians who aren't already playing to come through those gates. So that's really where that money is going.
Can I chime in too and say that with the pandemic putting a pause on championships, the amount of programs that we were able to get off the ground by not having to focus on so many different championships, like I'm really excited that we were able to get a new greens manual out, that we were able to update our club coach workshop to be online now. We're almost ready to release a new competition coach workshop. Like some of these programs that we're able to actually get out to the public to help clubs, to help bowlers, we just haven't had time before. But now, instead of being spread so thin across all the championships, we'll actually have time to be able to create more resources that are going to help more people.
And just to tag on to that, Jake, it was interesting when I did the Cross Canada Tour 2017 and 2018, it was I had the opportunity to speak to bowlers of all levels, not just competitive bowlers, but social bowlers and different boards who were volunteers who were on their boards at the time. And the number one things that kept coming out were, what do you want Bowls Canada to do by 2022? And it was, please help us run our clubs. Please provide resources and programs to help us retain our volunteers, to help us attract and recruit new bowlers. So this becomes a really exciting opportunity because not only can we now invest in an event that will hopefully become very marketable, very prestigious, that we can be able to invest in streaming to get more eyeballs on the event in general. But at the same time, we'll also be able to continue to work on those resources and programs that will help all bowlers across Canada.
Awesome. And Jake, Steve Santana popping in the chat said he took the online club coach workshop in February and he said it was excellent. So glad to see progression in that area. So that's good.
Glad you liked it, Steve.
Trevor Waite has a question in the chat. I'm going to hold that until a little later because I think it feeds in well with another question. So Trevor, I do see it, and we will get to it, I promise. Anna, we're coming right back to you. When making the proposal, why were no options given to the provincial bodies to review?
Yeah, this is a really good question, Darryl. It's this, championships and long-term athlete development and all of the complexities that go into hosting and planning and looking at the implications up and down the player development chain are really complex. So and I mentioned, I think I mentioned in the intro that in 2017, we brought together representatives from all the provinces to look at how we needed to revise the championships. Because as I said, at that time, we already knew changes needed to be made to be sustainable. And what ended up happening was because the representatives came with the hat of representing their province, what we weren't able to get to was to a place where everybody was representing the sport. And that was what we felt we really needed to do. We really needed to dig into the expertise that existed across the country in all of the provinces and bring them together, but bring them together under the same hat of being a steward of the sport and a steward of the future of the sport. So what we did was we we looked at the expertise we needed. So obviously we needed expertise from all of the regions across Canada. So people who understood how the competition was playing out, people who were perhaps on a competition committee in their province, people who had played at different championships, whether it was senior triples or mixed pairs, pairs fours, people who had been social bowlers, people who had played internationally. We had people who had hosted national events recently. Obviously, representation was required from coaches, from umpires. So all of that different sets of expertise that came together. And then we presented them with all of the challenges that we're having. So one of the challenges, and people may not realize this yet, but bowls has been dropped as a core sport in the Commonwealth Games. And not only have we been dropped as a core sport in the Commonwealth Games, but we've actually been dropped off of the agenda as of 2030. So even though Canada was putting in a bid to host and still working on putting in a bid, the Commonwealth Games Federation, the International Federation, has taken bowls off of the program. So this is because our format is not keeping up with evolution in sport. So when we look at some of the new sports that are coming online, be it 3-on-3 basketball, be it speed climbing or surfing, things like that, they all have a lot of things in common. They're short and they're fast and they're easy to understand, they're easy to follow. So at that point, when we start throwing all of these different mixes in, and then we start throwing in all of the evaluation we've done from our own players across Canada. So for example, our players have told us, so we actually do evaluations after every single national championship. We ask every player who's come to that event to fill out an evaluation form and give us their feedback. And one of the things that they say unanimously is that what makes a national championship for them is the ability to play everybody. And that's really important to have that full round robin. So you start putting all of these different factors together, it gets really complex. So we threw it to this group of individuals and said, come together as a collective, put all of your best ideas together. Here are all the issues that we need to play with. Here are all the challenges that are happening up and down the player development pathway. What do you think is going to work best for a future that is innovative and is going to attract and sustain the sport for years to come? So they came out with a format. So at this point, it then goes to the board, and then it went to a group called the President's Council, which is an advisory council. And at this point, it then was released. And so it's really not a question that, so I think really it was a question of, we really needed to make really hard decisions. And those hard decisions are very, very difficult when you can't put the hat on of representing the whole sport. So I think that's really the way, rightly or wrongly, that was a process that we took based on what we saw happen in the last go around of this.
So I think we have a little bit of a follow-up question. I think I understand what Jesse's asking, Jesse Wilkinson. So why were there no options, only one format kind of pushed out? Because the options were endless. And so at that point, when you've got a challenge that's that complex, putting it together to answer all of these questions that were posed to this group, it came together as a bit of a Jenga tower. And so as soon as you start taking one out and changing this and changing that, you're basically back to a drawing board. So what was exciting about this format is, what's being proposed is we try it and we see how it works, and then we evaluate it. And is it achieving what we needed to achieve? And we go from there. All right. Ryan, we'll get a little bit into the nuts and bolts of this whole thing. So So how does five-a-side work, and who decides what players play where, especially at the nationals? Are the winners decided? How are the winners decided? And can you move players around? That's a lot of questions, but I'll help you through it if you need it.
Thanks, Darryl. Thanks for easing my way into this too. Nothing too crazy. For five-a-side, we're looking to mimic World Bowls and Commonwealth Games, where you send a high-performance team of 5 men, 5 ladies, and you play 2 different disciplines. You're going to play pairs and triples at the same time, and you're going to play fours and singles at the same time. You're going to alternate in between. Most of the times, and I think we'll include this in the conditions of play once they're created by Jake, where everyone's discipline has to be set before we start the tournament. So there's no mixing from, I'm going to play singles one match, I don't like my opponent the next game, I'm going to switch over to the fours. You're playing singles the whole round, throughout everything, every game. You're going to play fours. You could change your lineup in the fours, but you can't change a player. And same for the pairs and triples. You can change your lineup, but you can't bring in a different player. Basically, that's it. Now, for the overall trophy, World Bowls has a formula on how they work out the overall winner, and it goes for points per win. And then there are bonus points for winning a gold, winning a silver, and winning a bronze medal. And that's how we're going to use it. There are shots for and shots against will be calculated as well, probably sets won, because we're going to go with sets. And those will be used as a tiebreaker, but everything will be done on paper for the overall trophy. But you're basically looking at 2 points for a win and the bonus points for a medal.
Perfect. Rob, a little bit adding on to that. How will each province pick the 5-man and 5-woman teams representing them at nationals? Is it a selection process?
Yeah, so there'll be more on this coming out, I believe, from the development committee. So provinces will have guidance. Ultimately, what the intention when we created this format was that everyone would qualify for this championship in the same manner. So ultimately, that will look very similar to what playdowns look like right now, where you'll compete as a 5-man team and a 5-woman team across the different disciplines, and ultimately a winner will come out kind of similar to the format that Ryan discussed, but we'll be obviously provide more detail once that guideline's created. But that's the idea. There won't be selections. This isn't kind of top bowlers picking their favorites. The idea was that you had to compete to play and then ultimately qualify, and everyone would get there in the same manner.
All right. Tammy, I've got one for you. So how will these changes affect the Atlantic provinces that currently send few, if any, players to the nationals?
Hi, Darryl, and thanks for the invitation to join the panel. I'm honored. I'd like to say I'm actually very excited and hopeful to see the return of some very competitive bowlers from Prince Edward Island and New Brunswick in this new format. I've had the privilege of representing my province of Nova Scotia a couple of times, and I can say that over the last few years, several years actually, it's felt less and less like a Canadian championship when my closest neighbors are no longer participating. With the exception of Team Nova Scotia and a handful from Quebec, we really don't see anyone east of Ontario, and I think that's pretty disheartening for a national championship. So I think, when I think about the smaller provinces, I think it has a lot to do with their inability to put together a full contingent of players. And then it's less, I don't know, there's less interest to compete, I guess, on the national stage, to walk out with your flag when there's 2 of you, for example, as a standalone pairs team, when all the other provinces have a full contingent. That's difficult. And I also believe, when I think of my friends in New Brunswick, and I remember, I think maybe 3 or 4 years ago, when we were only allowed to enter one discipline. So if you went to nationals, you couldn't participate in seniors or mixed pairs and that kind of thing. I know in New Brunswick, they made the choice for the most part to play in the senior triples, easier to get a group together. And that's the path they chose. So I think I'm hopeful that this new format is going to bring back some of my neighbors, and it's going to really feel more like a full East to West Canadian Championship.
So I think this one might have to be answered by Jake, but how quickly will the new provincial playdown information come out for the Atlantic provinces playing possibly this year for 2024?
Sooner than later. So I'm meeting with our development committee on Monday, actually, to expedite that process. But my plan is to have it out mid-May, definitely no later than end of May, because for those of you who don't know, I'm expecting a kid. So I would like to have that out and to the public before little one arrives.
Awesome. Another question related to this: if New Brunswick and PEI want to send a full 5-man or 5-woman, or even just a full 10 person team to the Canadians, what then happens to that maritime team?
So firstly, I think that would be incredible, and that's exactly what we want. If that were the case, there were more than one team, we'd need to see a maritime playoff. The new format is just allowing for 8 teams total.
So the idea is grow them and let them battle it out for this
Battle
spot.
it out.
That sounds pretty interesting.
I think, Darryl, if I can just jump on there, part of the, Jake mentioned the idea of pulling back so that we can essentially as a sport regroup. So if we start to see regularly, more participation everywhere, then that's an opportunity that we can grow. And so whatever that ends up looking like, whether that could be a Canadian Open or whether that is a bigger national event, but we need to get there first. We need to get really solid on, the repopulating the participation in the provincial playdowns, repopulating the excitement of this event across the entire country. So this doesn't mean this is forever. This means this is an opportunity for us to regroup so we can grow.
So this next question, Trevor, I think this will probably answer 2 of your questions. One about how the most populous provinces lose bowlers at nationals, and potentially the lower populous populous provinces get extra, like Nova Scotia. And he said, so PEI and New Brunswick can't field a full team. Nova Scotia fills the spots. Who chooses those spots? So the question I was going to pose is, can someone explain the need to fill the maritime team from with players from Nova Scotia as opposed to, say, the host province or those with a greater population of bowlers? It seems unfair that Nova Scotia will now get extra spots while other provinces are losing their spots they fought to get, like Ontario B. And who chooses these players?
So the Nova Scotia girl will try to answer this question. Well, I think the rationale, and others can jump in, but I think the biggest rationale for us is to fill those extra spots, if necessary, for Team Maritimes is geographical closeness and cohesiveness. I'm not sure how many of you listening know that bowlers from the Atlantic provinces actually have a regional competition called the Atlantic Bowl. It started back in 1972, so we're celebrating our 50th year this year in Charlottetown. And I think should Team Maritime require participation from another province, it makes good sense that it's Nova Scotia. We're close for training together. We are, we know each other on and off the green. So I think it could only benefit the team dynamic.
Awesome.
There was some thought that went into that too. When you look at the distance between some of these places, it's actually closer to get from New Brunswick to Halifax than it is from Calgary to Edmonton, for example. So I know that a lot of people have maybe complained about the distance, not wanting to drive, but when you look at Saskatoon to Regina, Calgary to Edmonton, some of these other provinces, they have to drive already. So it's actually closer to get from New Brunswick to Halifax. So distance isn't really much of an argument.
So who will be in charge of picking the extra players, and how is that decided if that happens?
Knock on wood, we're not going to have to worry about that. I'm pretty confident that New Brunswick and PEI will be able to field the team. But if we do need to go down that road, we are going to need to work with New Brunswick and PEI to find a meaningful way so that they can still field a team, that they can still compete.
before I move on to the next question, there was just a couple in chat that were relating to previous questions, and I wanted to hit on them. So Malcolm, with a bit of a cheeky question, is like, are there any prize money for winners in the new format? No comment?
There wasn't money to begin with. So, unless Malcolm, or I think it was Malcolm who asked, if you got some sponsorship ideas that can bring in money, all for it. But until that's a reality, and ultimately we got to do less better and make ourselves marketable assets so that we can bring in some money.
Perfect. Terry O'Neill has a question. I understand there will be medals for singles, pairs, triples, and fours. But will there be medals for overall 5-person finishes, gold, silver, and bronze?
Yeah,
Absolutely. I think you keep intact the Cy English Award and the
Lady Alexander.
Lady Alexander. I think you keep that intact, and it's part of our history. So there's no need to get rid of those trophies.
Perfect. I'll save some of those. There's a couple hosting ones. So Jake, a very, very popular question that I saw commented on a lot. Is there any opportunity to provide feedback or to get the decisions that were made tweaked or changed?
So you're right that there's certainly been a lot of popularity on the social media through emails. There's been quite a storm of people trying to contact us, which is great. I'm happy to hear all of these concerns, and they are being listened to. I'm not going to say that we're just ignoring things. But as Anna stated earlier, after every single event, we do take player feedback. We send out player surveys to the players. We send out surveys to the host club to find out what the host clubs are doing well or not so well. So we are gathering feedback after each and every event. And we're going to do that for 2024 as well, to find out how we can tweak this, how we can make it better, or does it need a full-scale overhaul again? Did 2024 maybe not just work? So we are going to roll out 2024 as best we can to see how this goes. And for 2025, I fully expect there to be a lot of changes based off of the lessons we learned, because this is something new and there's going to be a lot of learnings.
A follow-up to that, and you may have already answered it in your last question or your last answer, but there is some concern over the jump to such short ends, so 5 ends a set, and it's still being a meaningful competition. Is there any flexibility in moving to 7 ends for teams and possibly something like 9 for singles or some other longer variation, and possibly extending the time limit for each game a little?
Great question. That is a popular one. So part of the rationale for this is that when we look around at what's going on across the globe, we can see things like the BPL in Australia, the Bulls 3-5 in New Zealand that are doing exactly this of 2 5-end sets. But also this year, when we're changing the time limit for conditions of play from 2.5 to 2 hours and 15 minutes for this year, for an 18-end game of pairs, that breaks down to 7.5 minutes per end. So to introduce a new event where it's 2 5-end sets, that's 10 ends over 75 minutes. That's the same speed of play of 7.5 minutes per end. So part of the logic behind this is that we're not asking you to play any quicker. Your pace of play can still be exactly what it is this year, but recognizing that even just this year for 2023, we're cutting it back 15 minutes already. So I want to see how 2023 goes, how many people are timing out, if any. Is that pace of play reasonable? And if we find that in 2024, nobody's timing out, then yeah, by all means, we can move it up to 2 7-end sets, maybe even 2 9-end sets if we're able to do that. But I want to give this a go first just to see how this goes. Are people able to handle this adjustment?
And I think I'll jump in. I used to be a purist in the idea that, games had to be long so that you could see your best players progress. But I kind of recent reflection, especially as we talk about this. And I think an interesting challenge that this is going to have is for our, top players, are those ones that should be coming out on top in the long run. This really comes down to, you now need to focus on your pre-game routines, your pre-shot routines, and making everything count. What's exciting about this format is that we have like a value dense game. Every bowl matters. I mean, maybe the first end you can make some mistake, but after that you need to be dialed in. You have 9 more ends essentially to make the difference you need to win that game. And so there's going to be some excitement, and it's good for viewers and people watching. It brings in an exciting component where where you have to be on your toes at all times.
Just gonna scroll back before I move on to the next series of questions. Peter Mock, has BCB ever considered to raise the contribution from all the clubs in order to cover all the expenses? At the end of the day, there's no such a thing as a free lunch.
I think that's a question for you, Anna, more than me.
Yeah, it's a good thing I didn't put any more Tic Tacs in. So, so Peter, yes, we have considered that. In fact, actually, entry fees are probably going up. They are going up for 2023 in order to meet rising costs. The membership structure for Bowls Canada is not club-based. It's actually provincial or association-based. So there's a flat fee that each provincial association is charged, and then how that provincial association decides to recoup that from their members is the choice of each individual PSO. So there's for sure, you can raise membership fees, but the other thing we need to consider is that of the 13,000 plus bowlers in Canada, the overwhelming majority of them are not competitive bowlers. They're social recreational bowlers. And so we've got to be mindful that when you raise membership fees, that you're also delivering service that's going back to those 90% of those bowlers. So that's where it's important that a national association like Bowls Canada is investing in those programs like the Safe Sport Hub and policy templates and new e-learning modules and all the things that Jake's already mentioned. So, and the other thing, sadly, Peter, is that probably membership fees are going to have to go up because there is no funding for sport, for all national sport, is decreasing. And so for a sport like bowls, that's not an Olympic sport, this is really going to hit us hard starting April 1, 2024. And then we've got to be, we're going to have to look at a lot of things, including fundraising and the ability to market and the ability to deliver quality services and all of those things. So nothing's off the table. But raising membership fees has got to be something that's a collaborative approach with all of the PSOs, because you don't want to be in a position where you're raising fees that people can't afford to pay.
I have an interesting question, which we'll go back to kind of the team composition stuff that we were talking about a little earlier. Bobby Jean Charlton has a question. So if you, within that team format, in provincial playdowns, win the singles provincially, but the team does not fare well, does that mean the singles winner does not go to nationals?
Short answer, yes. I think this is probably the fairest criticism to this model, is that sometimes there will be people who don't perform provincially, who win a provincial event and don't go to nationals. But where the excitement of this comes in is that every game in a provincial championship now matters. You're playing for set points, you're playing for match points. So even if you're out, your game still matters. In a single tournament, you still need to perform and you have the chance to bounce back. So kind of short answer, I think that's a fair criticism, but ultimately it does bring an extra layer of strategy and consideration into our provincial championships.
There's a couple questions on this. I'll pick one. Dom Pixley, he's actually a UK viewer, so he's not in Canada, but he has a question which a lot of people had. When was the Commonwealth Games news announced, and why was it taken off as a core sport?
So that was announced prior to 2022, and it was a quiet little announcement that sort of slid over the international airwaves. So I want to say 2021, it was removed as a core sport. Essentially, most of the sports were removed as core sports, and only 2 remained. And the biggest issue to that is because this hosting issue. Sorry, the Tic Tacs are now getting to me. Sorry about that. Excuse me. The concept of getting hosts is not unique to Canada. It is something that international events are really struggling with as well. And so that's where you're seeing a lot of these really big multi-sport games are having trouble finding places to be hosted because of the costs that are involved. So one of the changes that the Commonwealth Games Federation made was to try and make it easier for the games overall to be hosted by reducing the number of sports that had to be counted. And so as a result, they're hoping that that's going to be easier to make that happen. I mean, the Olympics is going the same way, and we're seeing games like Pan Am Games and all similar trends. This trend is not unique. This is our opportunity to see the writing that's on the wall internationally and get a head start on what's happening for us, or what's happening in our sport, what we see happening in our sport for us. I just think it's such an opportunity in sport, for us to really, as lawn bowls, to be the sport, to be that leader, to be innovative and visionary. I mean, Australia and New Zealand are already, as Jake mentioned, they're already participating in some of these types of formats. And, this is our opportunity to jump in there.
I've got a follow-up question from Owen Kirby. My question is, why Tic Tacs when gum is far superior?
That is an excellent question, Owen. Thank you for that question. And it's because gum hurts my jaw.
There you go.
There we go.
Fair answer. Jake, this is a popular one, and there's a whole bunch of questions on this kind of stuff. What kind of review and evaluation of the event will take place moving forward?
All right. So I did see on our Facebook page that there was actually a really good comment from shout out Marianne Gillies asking, are we going to be evaluating this? Are we going to be evaluating that? And duly noted. So the development committee, and with the board probably, will be coming up with an evaluation metric. And part of what we're going to be using will be some of the key principles that our working group came up with. So when we met to review these championships to begin with, we came up with 5 principles of what national championships should be. And so we're going to start from there by using those principles and say, well, did we meet the objectives? And so this will for sure take into account things like the financial costs, not just for us, but for the provinces and for the players. We're going to for sure still stick with the player experience surveys. So everybody who's attending is going to get to fill out those feedback surveys. We're going to be asking the host club to go through an extensive evaluation as well for how is hosting, how is working with the various groups that you're going to have to work with, whether it's tourism bodies or city municipalities. So there is a pretty extensive list of things that we're going to try to capture through this evaluation process. I don't know if I can list them all here, but it is something that we're taking very seriously because we do want to build and grow on this. And the only way you can do that successfully is if you know how this went to begin with.
Kind of a follow-up question to that one. Shane O'Flaherty, the problem with player feedback is that it doesn't capture the feedback of all those who miss out on getting to the nationals, say the provincial players. How does that get captured?
Good question. So when we bring the presidents together at the President's Council, we do often ask them, how are things going? And that'll be one of the questions we're going to ask as well once this new format runs out, is how did your provincial playdowns go? What feedback did you get? So some provinces are going to need to ask very specific questions to their players when they're entering playdowns for them to run a successful analysis. And hopefully they'll be willing to share that with us so then we can learn from that as well. But it does become a little bit trickier for us to send a survey to a provincial playdown participant who doesn't advance because I don't have their contact info, their emails or anything like that. So we're going to have to work with our provincial partners on that. And hopefully we'll be able to get a really good idea of how things went in every single region.
Perfect. I have a question. The name is hallucinating, spelled hallucinating. So don't know who it is, obviously, but I believe they are in BC because they talk about, speaking of distance, and we mentioned distance with Atlantic provinces and whatnot. Vancouver Island and the mainland don't tend to interact as much as we have a large amount of bowlers. Would it ever be possible to split BC into 2, island and mainland?
So sorry, Jake, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Rob. You first.
Well, part of what we talked about as this committee was the magic numbers when it comes to draws. So that's 2, 4, 8, 16. So ultimately, part of the reason why the Maritime team is 2 provinces combined is to get us that magic number of 8. So splitting the lower the mainland and the island. Sorry, I'm not from BC, but splitting those up ultimately kind of takes away from that magic number. So I'm sure there's an opportunity, and maybe Jake was talking about that. But ultimately, the magic number was one of the big considerations for coming to a format of 8.
And it's Lucy Ewan. He actually said in chat that's who it is. So now we know.
Good to know. The only thing I was going to say to that is that I don't want to make any promises for the future, but our hope is that eventually this is going to grow, right? So if we do get enough people playing, if Bowls actually does blow up over the next 5 years, then I don't see why we couldn't end up having individual teams for New Brunswick and PEI, maybe split up the island and the mainland and end up back at 16 teams instead if we have the numbers to support it. But that might be a little ways down the line.
Rob, there's a lot of talk about regional bias, East versus West, and whatnot, and specific provinces being more influential than others. Example is the loss of the indoor being for the East and against the West. What would you say to the idea that one province or one region was the focus of these changes and influenced it a lot?
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer. I think having sat in that room for the weekend and kind of worked with 18 other people, one province, one region, that wasn't really the consideration. And kind of as Anna alluded to, I think everyone took the approach of being stewards for the game. This was a decision that was what was best for lawn bowls in Canada going forward. It wasn't really coming down to who could gain what out of it. And ultimately, we had people there that could speak to the challenges that each region faces or each province. And those were considerations and discussions. But I wouldn't say that any one province, it's hard to even kind of imagine that based on the discussions we had, that one province really was like the person we were trying to advantage the most out of this. That just wasn't really the approach we took to that conversation.
Good. This coming from chat might be for Anna or Jake. With the changes or the dropping of bowls from the Commonwealth Games as a core sport and the difficulty that bowls has had in getting into those conversations with Commonwealth Games, are there other nations or even the Commonwealth that's considering changing the format?
Ooh, I can answer this. So in doing my research leading up to this, so this was not a spur of the moment decision. I went through reams of data, worked with an external PhD person, but also I interviewed other nations. So I talked to 4 other leading bowls countries, and they were super willing to share what they're doing, what they liked, what they didn't like, how their national championships are going. And I'm going to give credit to Anna quickly for the reason they were willing to be so forthcoming with what they're doing is because of building those relationships. So with Anna helping out with the bowls and the Olympic advisory group or whatever that was called, where you're meeting with other countries, because we're able to build such a positive relationship, then when I came asking, saying, hey, I want to pick your brains, they were all willing to sit down with me for a couple of hours and say, here's what we're doing, here's what's going okay, here's what's not. Tell us how things go. We want to hear what the rest of the world is doing too. So other countries are absolutely doing things differently, and they are listening and watching. I've actually had 2 of them reach out to me personally saying, let us know how things go. We're watching with eager eyes. So we might be blazing a trail forward, I guess, in some respects, but I would not be surprised if other countries are going to follow suit if this goes well.
That's fair. Ryan, being a good Ontario guy, is there a concern about the loss of Ontario's B team when it took so long to put in place? Why was the B team removed when Ontario has the most players in Canada?
Yeah, Darryl, this is definitely a tough one. Coming from Ontario, I've had a very successful career as being a B representative. But this is a showcase. We want to make this a showcase of our provincial champions, and that's what it's all about. So one team for everyone, and that's what we came up with. We look at other sports, Basketball Canada, Canada Games, winter and summer, where many Olympians start their career. One representation, one province, one team. That's it. We go to Australia, Queensland, New South Wales, huge numbers of bowlers, thousands upon thousands of bowlers in those two states, whereas the other states in Australia are down to not as many. They're minimal, pretty much. Each state in Australia sends one team to their national championships. We can look at curling. Curling has, yes, curling. We often think of ourselves as curlers. And you're going to say, Ryan, curling sends 2 Ontario teams. But those are 2 different associations. So they're paying money into Canada Curling. Ontario is 1 province in bowling, so we're only sending 1 team. I think Anna can touch on other sports that only send 1 team, or some numbers maybe.
Well, I mean, you pretty much captured it, Ryan. I mean, this is probably one of the toughest decisions that group wrestled with, and it is hard, without a doubt. But again, you know, this is about regrouping right now to do things really well, and then growing from there.
Looping in on this, speaking of B teams, in the past we've had backfill when somebody doesn't or isn't able to field a team. So if a province can't send anybody, will we continue to do a backfill of a B team?
At this moment in time, I don't think we're looking to do that. I think after a review after 2024, I think that's something that Jake and his committee can look into doing. But at this time, it's 1 province or 1 team per province, or to get to 8. 8's that magical number that we want. And that's it.
All right. I know we've got a few hosting questions in the chat, but Anna, we've heard the bid process is under review for hosting, but is there any general overview or thoughts on how we hope this will run and how we'd want it to be hosted?
Excellent question. So the goal is in reducing from 7 events to a single event. That allows us to create a really solid bid package. The goal being to put that out and invite host entities to bid on the championship. So this is the process that you see in other sports. So what we're looking for is, you know, hosts over the last years have told us how difficult it is. You know, it's a real challenge and it's a stress on all of their volunteers and all of their club members when they do this. So what we are looking to create is a bid package that will be attractive to an entity that of which the facility is one partner. So ideally, you know, there are actually tourism councils and sport councils in cities across Canada. And ideally, what we would be looking for is one of those cities to be recognized, to tap their facility on the shoulder and say, hey, we want to attract the national championships. Let's work together. And there's numerous bonuses to that. One is obviously that once you have that city, that bigger host group involved, then not all of the pressure is on the volunteers and the members of the club. So now we're starting to be able to tap into experts within those sport councils and tourism bodies. We're able to tap into a much greater network of volunteers to be able to help do some of those things that don't require bowling expertise to do. So the goal is to be able to have a bid package that these groups bid on years in advance. So we want to be able to provide that stability to bowlers and to provinces to know where the event is going to be in years to come. Now, obviously, if we're changing things dramatically again after 2024, then that does become difficult to allow for that multi-year type of bid. But going down the road, this is the vision. This is what we want to achieve.
I'm actually really excited to start working with cities and tourism bodies. And based off of what we've done the past few years, just looking at last year as an example, we were able to work really well with Tourism Mississauga. And just using that city as one example, their volunteer list is some 5,000 people long. So when we're looking to get people to set up and tear down each day or flip scoreboards or whatever it is. It doesn't need to be a bowler. And so if we have a list of 5,000 volunteers, think of what that could do for helping us to really make this event easier on the host club and to be able to really make it a bigger, more exciting event.
You may have touched on this, but how does a single venue or city help the financial issues that we have right now?
You want me to take that, or you're gonna? Yeah, so with 7 championships spread out across the country and 7 different hosts, that means 7 different hosting grants, 7 different times for shipping things across the country, 7 different times for recruiting umpires, you get my gist with this. So when we have one event at one location, whether it's one city or one club or even 2 clubs in the same city, that helps financially right out of the gate, just because we're not doing things 7 times over. So regardless of which location it's in, it's going to help financially just from virtue of not being 7 times doing the same thing.
Another follow-up, will there be a multi-year hosting agreement to keep it in a space for more than just a single year?
That is for sure the plan. We would like to see a host region, a host entity bid on this for 2, maybe even up to 3 years consecutively, so that way they can learn and build on it. So what we see a lot of times is when clubs are hosting for the first time in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, first time ever, it's difficult to get everything done that needs to happen because you haven't done it before or for so long. But now once you've done it once, we're off somewhere else. And so what we would like to see happen is at least a 2-year commitment. So that way you can build off of what you've just learned and make year 2 bigger and better.
And I think you've already touched on this with hosting and linking with the city, but how will a host club or province benefit from this? And will BCB still be losing money even if the province or club is gaining money?
I'd like to think that the host is going to benefit from this, not just greatly from a financial aspect, whether it's working with the host city or municipality, the tourism body, partnerships that we're going to collect along the way, a hosting grant that we're obviously going to continue to put into this. But I'm also thinking that they're going to gain from this from a participant standpoint. I'm envisioning this event to be such a big focus in the city or community where it's being held that I can envision there being, food trucks and a live band and boom cameras and just like a huge deal that anybody who's walking by is going to say, what's going on over there? I need to go check that out. And so I could see whoever's hosting this gaining 20, 50, 100 new members just from virtue of hosting because it's such a big ordeal. So financially, yes, they're obviously going to benefit. We make that almost a guarantee. We want to make sure anyone who's hosting our event isn't losing money. But then there's also other aspects to hosting where you're going to benefit as well.
All right. More Jake. Why was the youth championship changed to one event and the age limited to 14 to 21? We have a lot of talented players that play under 14 who get a lot from playing with their peers, and our players that played in the under 25 and are still between 21 and 25 will be lost with no opportunities. How do you see the 21 to 25-year-olds? How will you see the 21 to 25-year-olds for possible selection if they don't have a championship? Now, that's a lot of questions.
It is. So something that we're going to be rolling out, I believe 2025, maybe sooner, is something for regional high performance events. So what that means is if you're looking to advance through the high performance path, if you want to play for Team Canada in the future, we're going to be having regional events using our regional coach network to bring those players together so we can see them, evaluate them, have them compete against each other and what have you. So I'm not necessarily the best person to speak to what that looks like or exactly when that's rolling out. But for those who are over the age of 21 that are still interested in being on the high performance team, still want to compete internationally, that's the avenue for them. And so that's going to be open to, it's not just age specific either, but that's where they can go. And so part of why the age drop from 25 to 21 is twofold. One, we know that a lot of our athletes who are over 21 are already competing elsewhere. So they're competing in the majors, they're competing at the mixed fairs, they're competing in other events to get the team aspect. They're also maybe already on a senior or a development squad. So they're already pursuing that high performance track. But then there's also the recognition that when World Bowls has the World Youth Championship that we used to send the winner to, the requirement for you to be at least 18 is no longer there. So that means if we wanted to, we could send a prodigy who's only 15, 16, 17, whatever that looks like. But it's not exactly meaningful to have a 12-year-old playing against a 21-year-old. That's just not exactly the most meaningful event in the world. So part of why the age has jumped up to 14 is because of peak height velocity. Most people have gone through puberty by the time they are 13, 14 in that range. And so if you've reached peak height velocity at the age of 14, then you have a much better chance of playing against someone who's 18 plus that's actually an adult, as opposed to someone who hasn't reached that yet.
Yeah, I even think from a high performance committee, we recognize that we have to be out there more, and those athletes that are that 21 to 25 trying to break onto the senior squad, we'll be there for you. We're starting to roll out evaluation camps. We're going to be at these regional camps or regional events, so we can watch you play. We can start learning about you, and that's where that selection will come from. We're not going to forget about those players. We need those players. We need that talent pool to get bigger and bigger, so our national squad gets bigger and better. Often we see the youth champions come up through the ranks and get to the senior squad, and when it comes to a selection event, they've played so much singles that sometimes they're lost in a team game. So that's where we have to develop them at these regional events and regional competitions to get them ready for that senior squad. So I'm looking forward to it. The High Performance Committee knows we have a lot of work ahead of us to deal with selection for that, but we will be making a bigger presence at these events and competitions.
My trusty chat moderator, Michael Patulli, just asked me a question. He said he's not sure if this question about backfill got fully answered. So he rephrased it a little bit, and he says, say Saskatchewan didn't send a team to Nationals, you would only have 7 teams. Would the Nationals backfill to get to 8, which is the magic number, or run with a bye?
I believe the bye team would be the 8th team, so it would run with a bye. I could be speaking wrong, but I believe that's the understanding.
That is the intent. So to make this a prestigious event where it is the provincial champion and not a event full of B teams again, for 2024, we would like to see if we can actually get every region, every province to send a provincial champion. And for a province like Saskatchewan, for example, to find 5 men, 5 women, I don't think that that's going to be a challenge.
Another question from Lucy Ewan, and this is actually one that gets asked a lot and has in the past, even when we did previous changes. Why not make it an open national tournament? It would address a lot of the issues like representation and bring in more revenue, as likely more teams would enter.
So we did go down that road with the open singles from 2013 to 2017, and it did okay in 2013 and 2014, but towards the end of that, numbers were down, and it became basically whoever just happens to live nearby or is a member at the host club, which then starts to question, is this really a national championship again when there's only 3 provinces attending and it's just full of whoever the local club members are? So we did try that already with the outdoor singles, and it's not something that we brought up thinking that it went well then to try again right now. That doesn't mean that it's not something we're going to completely write off. I'd like to think that we're open to trying things in the future, but based off of how most recently our effort at having an open event didn't result in what we're hoping, we're going with this option for now.
And just to build on that, hosting a Canadian Open is something that we would like to see happen in addition to the national championship. And part of what happens with hosting only a single national championship, that does decrease the congestion in the calendar for what we in such a short outdoor season. So when we go down to one national championship, that's also going to reduce the weekends required across the provinces to run their play downs. And now all of a sudden we have more room in the calendar to do things like put together a Canadian Open. And that is a really exciting opportunity that we would love to see happen. But the first thing we need to do is make sure that we're getting our national championships done.
All right. Now I think this has been already talked about a little bit, but there are concerns about the loss of development opportunities, and this is for Jake again. Development opportunities with the reduction of events and the number of players at nationals. What is happening to address this?
I'm actually really excited about the potential now for development. So with our previous model, current model, there's just simply no time in the calendar to do anything. It's playdowns 24/7 basically. So most of our provinces, most of our clubs just never stood a chance to run any sort of meaningful development events because there's no time. I think it's this year that Ontario alone is running like 33 days of playdowns. And then with our national championships taking another 30, that's like 60 days of playdowns in a short season. Like there's just nowhere to do it. But now when we move to shorter playdown events that'll take place over 1, maybe 2 weekends, a national championship that's going to be somewhere between 6 and 10 days, there's so much time in the calendar now that we can actually start looking at running camps and clinics and regional competitions or local competitions to actually help players progress from that learn to bowl stage up to train to excel. And so I'm eager to start helping provinces move forward with that. So some of the things that we're looking at are running more coach workshops. So that way every province has the necessary coaches to start running some camps, some clinics, some competitions of Club A versus Club B to really help those players develop. And now there's actually time in the calendar to do that. So I'm excited to see how this is going to go forward.
Just a quick follow-up to that one. When we are trying to grow the sport, why are we limiting the opportunities at nationals and making it a more elite-centered event for a few top bowlers?
Shouldn't national championships be for the best of the best? And almost any other sport, your national championships are for the best people. And so while it would be a nice luxury for us to have 47 events with 56 disciplines, we're just not in that financial place right now. So when we're going to have to draw back and look at what we can sustainably do, national championships for the most part in almost every sport, first and foremost, are a place for provincial champions to compete.
I also think it's kind of important to recognize, like at the grassroots level, our sport has a lot of attraction for people who are just ordinary, kind of do their day job, but don't want to compete competitively. You look at B Cubed in Saskatchewan, I think it's getting trialed in Manitoba with quite a bit of success already. Long summer nights, there's corporate challenges out in Alberta. There's a lot of people who are interested in our sport for the social aspect. So I think reducing the calendar size actually opens up opportunity to really take advantage of those opportunities for our sport, which ultimately grows it and feeds into that competitive development.
There's a bunch of questions in the chat that I want to tackle, and I don't want to talk about selection just yet. I want to get to that in a minute, but I'll take this one. Bobby Jean Charlton from BC. She's worried about the removal of the uniqueness and the unique quality of a singles player, as not all players are comfortable playing in team games. And she says for her situation, she'll be lucky to find 4 other ladies with her commitment. With big events like Champion of Champions and the indoor singles at the World Bowls event, what are we doing about limiting the singles players who just want to play singles and that's it?
I think that goes back to this opens up the calendar. Ultimately, in a vacuum, sure, we've lost the singles play when it comes to a national competition format, but ultimately this leaves the room open for a Canada Open. I think I saw Shane, if you can get sponsorship and start the Canada Open, go nuts. Like this is the opportunity for provincial bowls associations, for clubs, and for individuals to take the initiative, start the tournaments, and bring bowls to what you want to see it to be. I saw a lot of comments this week over Facebook about what bowls should be. This is your opportunity. There's time in the calendar now. Take the initiative and start those tournaments. Make it what you want it.
All right. Tammy. I see you down there. Under this new system, where you win or lose as a team, there's a concern that bringing in a young player or an inexperienced player or even a new club player is risky and could cost you a chance to make it to the Canadians. Previously, you could enter the fours with a new person, possibly lose, and still have something like the pairs or the singles to fall back on and play with stronger players that you usually play with. Where is the incentive to bring new players?
I guess, firstly, Darryl, I would argue that you win or lose in any system, not just this new system, as a team. I don't really need to look any further than my own family when you talk about risk and bringing on young and inexperienced bowlers. Our mom took a chance on my sister and I. She was a seasoned and decorated bowler when she took us under her wing. Some might think crazily. We were pretty green. But you know what? We put in the time, we practiced, we trained, we took it seriously, and we improved over time and with experience. And I think that's important. I agree with what Jake said earlier. Making it to a Canadian championship should be hard. It shouldn't be easy, and we need to have the best players there. I think that we need to continue to develop and grow the mindset that coaching is essential, that players need coaches. I think that, like any other sport, hard work and training is required, and we need to recognize that. When I look at our own province, I think that we do a really good job of bringing in our young and inexperienced players in the game. As a smaller province, we don't have as many competitive bowlers to draw from. So without encouraging new blood, we probably would be challenged to field a team as well. We've played with and alongside our juniors for as long as I can remember. And if you look at their success nationally and internationally, it speaks for them for itself. And they needed to start somewhere, and they were given the opportunity. And I think we need to do that with other bowlers that are interested to getting to that level. I think Saskatchewan, it's another perfect example of a province that combines their seasoned veterans with their youth, providing them with that invaluable experience that they can gain from those veterans. Where would any of them be if nobody took a chance on them? And I guess I also think of our Atlantic Bowl. While it's not the same as provincials or supported by BCB, I would argue it's just as competitive. And it's an example of a strong regional event, which I think we need to continue to grow east to west. I'd like to see it adopted in other parts of the country. And as everyone's already said, that calendar is wide open now. Make those regional events happen. I think that's how you bring the new, the young, the less experienced players into the game. You start them at those regional events, you build them up to the next level. You take a chance on them and you let them get there.
This is a question that I like, and I've seen this brought up a lot. And you've already touched on this a little bit, Tammy. So changing this system to one event, team game 5, and you're only sending 5 through, seems to really hurt the development of the whole game. There's not enough provincials to develop players. There's not enough incentive to go to nationals. How do we address that lack of, or the gap in development now?
Yeah, I think I alluded to it a little bit. It's, at the club level, it's these regional events. It's playing inter-province because the time is there now, or in the larger provinces and other areas of your province.
I'm excited to see some of the events that I think might come back. So pre-pandemic, we were starting to see a BC versus Alberta test match going on, and that was new and exciting. I think that we might see the Tri-Province come back as an event, which hasn't happened for a little while. So I'm excited to see how innovative or what sort of initiative our provincial members can take in helping to develop players within their own province or within their own region.
That would be exciting. I would love that. With the change, so this is for Ryan, and there's a lot of talk about selection in the chat. So high performance chair Ryan. With the change in format to 5-a-side and it being similar to the international 5-person team format, why wouldn't we just send the Canadian Championships to the international competitions and not do selection anymore? How will selection occur moving forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, we are still going to have selection for our high performance squad. There's a lot of variables that you have to play into this. World Bowls runs biannual, so we have a gap in timeline there. So if you win one year, where do we send the team? We have Australian-based players who are playing against world-class players that have to still be considered for our high-performance squad. They're playing daily, weekly against some of the best players in the world. The experience that they're getting down there is so valuable that they can bring it back to our selection camps and share it with our players, share those experiences, teach, mentor the younger players. We realize that we have to get out there more as a selection, as a high performance committee in regards to selection, and we're making strides in that. Last year, we rolled out the evaluation camps for those that signed notice of expressions of interest to be members of our high performance squad, and we held 3 camps across Canada. We're going to be rolling out those camps again once our 2024 squad 2023. Our next squad comes out. I believe it's for 2024. Sorry about that. We're going to be releasing those dates for those camps so we can start seeing more players play. And I think that's what it boils down to. Our selection panel, our high performance committee needs to see more people play. The regional coaching network that we've developed over the last few years, an excellent opportunity for us to get the data on the players that we may not see on a daily basis, or we may not know of, or some stars that are emerging through the ranks. It's just important for us to make that presence. And I think we're making strides in that department.
So with the movement to selection on a few of these items that we used to send the winners to, like the indoor singles and the champion of champions, going forward for selection, do you have to be part of the national team to be selected to those?
I think this is going to be determined by some people, because we don't know what the buy-in to this program is going to be, to this new format. So I don't think we can answer that right now.
How would you see the players who play on indoor in BC?
Help. Again, I think it boils down to us being out there with our regional coaches out there, seeing these players play. They're out there. We just need to see them play.
Yeah, and just building on that, that's one of the goals in this new strategic plan that's on our website, is to grow the regional coach network to go across the country, because the regional coaches then become the eyes and the supporters within those different areas. You know, when we were fortunate to work with Brock University a couple years ago to look at why there's always so many less women on the competitive scene than there are men. This is not unique to bowls. It's pretty common across all sport. But one of the things that the research found was that women need to be invited. Women don't inherently think that they're good enough to play. So one of our goals with regional coaches is to actually have somebody there in place who in BC would be seeing people play at the indoor, and tap people on the shoulder and go, hey, have you ever considered, did you know about the national team program? It's that opportunity to actually encourage more people to become interested in the competitive program, and to recognize that ideally, again, growing into this regional competition program, that there's going to be more stepping stones. I mean, right now we have a huge gap in what happens for a player between club, and then all of a sudden it's going to the nationals, and then, oh my gosh, now it's going to international, and we're missing these pieces in between. And that's part of what we need to see fill in order to get that full player development. So yeah, there's so many moving pieces to this one vision. You know, Jake mentioned the coach development. Ryan's talked about the regional coach program. We've talked about a Canadian Open that we want to get going. Like it's a really big vision. And the nationals is one part of that.
So we've had a lot of talk. There's a number of under 25 players in the chat talking about this. Jake Masterson for one, and Lucy Ewan, and even Cody chimed in on this. So with the selection and the removal of the under 25s, when we have the World Under 25 Championships that we've sent our winners to, how are we going to be able to see those players when they don't have a championship of their own? And to Cody's point, will there be an opportunity for someone that's not on the team to be selected if they perform really well?
First off, I'm going to say Cody doesn't qualify as an under 25. He's missed that boat for about a decade by now. But I think part of that comes back to the regional coach, regional evaluation, regional competitions that we're rolling out. So if we're going to be working with our regional coach network to actually see these people playing, maybe it's playing at the Maritime Bowl, maybe it's playing at the BC versus Alberta test match, if that's a thing. So we're going to be relying on our regional coaches for sure. But then once we start rolling out our regional, whether it's an evaluation or a competition or whatever that looks like, then if you're interested in playing at the World U25s, then you're going to have to show up there. So that way the selectors, scouts, whoever it is, will be able to actually see you play.
I think it would boil down to athletes putting in an expression of interest to play in that tournament. And then we can determine how we're going to evaluate them from there and get the right people to watch them.
Now this might be an Anna question, but para has been a big talk in the past few years, trying to develop that, and we held our first championship. So I guess the general question in all of this and selection and whatnot, what about para?
So this is a great question. Para sport is an area that we see as growth. It's really important especially for a sport like bowls, which is so accessible, that we're providing opportunity for Canadians who have disabilities to be able to play. When we start to look at international opportunities, this is also an area of growth. So we see opportunities now at World Bowls Championships. We see opportunities at the International Bowls for the Disabled Championships. But for us in Canada, this program is so young, it's so new, so it's needing a lot of encouragement. There used to be a very, very strong visually impaired bowler network, and we were able to absorb with the cooperation and collaboration of different groups. We were able to bring that on, but that's one where we recognize that it still needs to grow. It still needs support. And, we're excited to see where that can go.
Awesome. Want to loop back to a question, which I don't think I have something on here specifically for, but Bob Seltzer says he's glad to see that the new championship includes youth, but what about the seniors who make up a very large number of BCB members? What is happening for them?
That's where we had to make some tough decisions. So I know that this is going to be very unpopular, but when we looked at what we can sustainably do, part of the data collection that I pulled together was who's playing where, what's the average age of people attending our championships. And based off the past 5 events, the average age of people at majors is 62. So we already know that seniors are playing at our majors, even with the restrictions in place of having to choose between senior triples or majors. And so I know one of the questions in the chat earlier was, what about the average age of just majors, not including senior triples, mixed pairs, indoor? It is still 61.8, so it is still 62 of just pairs for singles. And to go even further, I did some more data digging. Just last year alone, of the 16 people playing for a pairs medal, 5 of them were over the age of 70. And for the people playing for a fours medal, 13 out of 32 were over the age of 70. So what that tells me is that we already have seniors playing at the majors. So when we look at having to cut back on some redundancies, and instead of having multiple opportunities for the same demographic, we had to make some tough choices. And the reality is that right now we are seeing a lot of seniors playing in our majors. So I know that that's not a popular decision, but for now, for the short term, this is what we're going with, just to try and regroup and maybe grow. So if we do find that in 2024, that average age drops down to 22, then yeah, for sure, we're going to look at how we can reinvigorate and bring back something for the senior demographic. But at the moment, the data is telling me otherwise.
Kind of a follow-up to this, which also brings in mixed pairs, but one of you may know this guy, Chris Stadnyk. Can provinces still host their own senior triples and mixed pairs if they choose to do so?
Yes, I hope so. I know that some provinces have their own novice events. Some provinces have their own triples events. Ryan, I know that you're a big fan of using the word masters instead of seniors. So yeah, I would love to see provinces have their own mixed pairs, masters events, whatever it is, and maybe even start an invitational. Why not have a, I don't know, Manitoba, we're going to invite Saskatchewan and have a masters event.
Really interesting question from our UK viewer again. Looking at the international side of things, there's been a lot of talk of a Pan-American tournament involving Canada, US, Argentina, Brazil, and Jamaica. Would an event like this garner interest in Canada?
Why, yes, it would. So, yeah, we're actually a part of that group working on that event, and we're working towards a goal of having that first event run in 2024, ideally down in the States as to start, and then having it move around. I think it's a really, again, an exciting opportunity, and part of this bigger vision of trying to provide more and different opportunities at all levels for people to be able to play.
All right. Back to you, Jake. You're popular. For each level, club, provincial, and national, will the new Canadian Lawn Bowling Championship increase or decrease the number of competitive bowlers in the final 3 stages of the long-term athlete development program?
Well, that's a doozy of a question. I think that's actually kind of an unfair question to ask. So in any other sport that you can think of, if it's basketball, soccer, Quidditch, when you sign up to try a new sport, you don't often say within the first year, 3 years, 5 years, hey, I'm going to play at the national championships. There's usually some sort of programming that goes on, whether it's working with a local coach, whether it's entering some sort of a club competition to first prove that you're a club champion, whatever that looks like. It's unique to each sport. So I don't know if I can say that's really fair that a national championship is expected to suddenly turn new players into champions. That's not usually the point of a national championship. There's development events, intentional programming that goes on first. So I will say that with these new championships, though, being able to free up the calendar, that this should result in more progression for people to go from stage to stage, because there should be intentional programming now. So there should be a desire from someone who's starting out saying, I want to get better. My local club, what can you do to help me become better? I need a club coach. Now I need a competition coach. Now I need a performance coach. Now I want to play against my club next door to prove that I'm the best in my little region. Now I want to prove I'm the best in the province. So there should be a lot of different support mechanisms in place to help someone go from grassroots up to a national champion. And I don't know if I can say that it's the event itself that's going to make that happen, but this is the first step that's freeing up the calendar that can allow for these programs to exist.
That's fair. Got a couple questions in chat. So this one's for Tammy, and it's from Cameron. Does Tammy think this format will get more people involved in competitive bowls in Nova Scotia and the Atlantic provinces?
I'm certainly hoping it will, Cameron. I'm certainly hoping it will, yeah. I think we have lots of room to grow, even in Nova Scotia. As you know, we have been doing a lot of work in the area of coaching and getting some players moving up, coming out of their comfort level and just inner club and playing a little more competitively. I think we have room to grow, getting them to our Atlantic Bowl. And I certainly think there's room for growth with this format to get Prince Edward Island and New Brunswick involved again, because there certainly are some very competitive players there.
Awesome. So I'll throw this out to the group. Malcolm White. So thinking of Ontario, provincials were likely a profit generator. And it might be in other provinces as well. He corrects himself, more than 3, but he said 3 events. There's more than 3 events that brought in a lot of entry fees. Could there be a loss of revenue for them?
I would argue and say that I don't see how it could be a revenue maker when you have to fund the athletes to then go to the event. I would be shocked if any province was actually making hand over fist money from running these provincial playdowns when they then are expected to fund someone to go. But even if that were the case, then now, once again, there's opportunity to run more events. So with Ontario being as big as it is, having whatever the number of people that are there right now, why don't we then have them replace that with more events now that there's time in the calendar? So I know WOBA is a big thing. The ladies 3 days is a big thing in Ontario. We could see bigger and better things happening. So they could have a Masters event again. They could have some other sort of youth event. There's opportunity for them to make money through whatever event they want to now.
Perfect. Lucy Ewan, specifically about regional coaches, how will the regional coaches be selected? Will you have them in each district, as some provinces have more or are more spread out, I should say?
So I can take that one. So there's actually a call that goes out through the Bulls Canada website and through This Week in Bulls, and out through the provincial presidents. So we've been looking to call to hire regional coaches for the last couple of years. So it's basically an application process, just like you would find for any other position. To be fair, the regional coaches are volunteers, and so they're individuals who are not only certified in National Coaching Certification Program, but also understand long-term athlete development, understand the national program, but they're also willing to dedicate and be passionate about the development of bowls. So we do provide some support to help those regional coaches do training events and get out to see people within their area, especially for those regions that are larger. But this is one of the areas where we need to grow. So in our strategic plan, the goal is to continue to grow this network, one coach, one region at a time, so that by 2026, we have 7 regions covered.
I think we may have covered this a little bit, but this ties into that question. Isn't BCB's role to lead on those regional events with the regional coaches in place? Whose responsibility is it to develop regional events?
Go ahead.
You can.
I was going to say it's a shared responsibility. So we are going to be rolling out regional events that will be organized and basically run by BCB, but there is also an opportunity for provinces to share in that responsibility as well. So if a province is actually serious about developing their own players, then they share some of that responsibility of creating their own regional events or partnering with us on whatever regional events we're rolling out to.
Yeah, when we look at roles and responsibilities, the different levels within sport, generally development of players at a local level, it would be the responsibility of a club. Development of players at a provincial level would be the responsibility of the Provincial Sport Association, and development at a national, international level is the responsibility of the national organization. So there's different types of regional events. So Tammy talked about, and Jake talked about, the Atlantic Bowls, the tri-province that used to exist. I believe there's a new Western Canada Challenge coming out. So those regional challenges would be belonging to the actual provincial bodies or to those regions. But then when we start looking at high performance development, well, that's a national national high performance development is a national responsibility. And so recognizing that this is still an area that needs to grow across the country, Bowls Canada is prepared to say, okay, for these regional evaluation events or regional competitions that could actually stimulate development for that learn to compete or train to compete and perform, train to perform level of athlete, that would be a Bowls Canada responsibility. But again, that's got to be in partnership with the different regions. So there's a lot of collaboration that needs to happen with athlete development, but who takes the lead would really depend on who owns that type of development.
We have a follow-up question to that just popped into the chat. David Lewis, I'm hearing that partnerships with the provinces is key to the success of these new approaches. As BCB did not consult, how are you anticipating the response when partnership seems one-sided?
Sorry, can you say that again, Darryl, please?
Yeah, so this one's from David Lewis. He says, I'm hearing that partnerships with the provinces is key to the success of these new approaches. As BCB did not consult, how are you anticipating the responses when partnership seems one-sided?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Certainly the conversations that had been had at the President's Council indicated that the need for change was required. I think that's really going to depend on each province. I mean, some provinces are more interested than others, and we're going to have to build those relationships back. And, as I said, really tough decisions were made. They were made by a group that was representative of the country in general. And we go from there.
All right. Rob and Ryan, here's another popular question. And it comes up all the time. Will it be mandatory for all high-performance senior squad members to compete in their provincial playdowns for the Canadian Lawn Bowling Championship to remain on Team Canada?
Robert, you want me to go?
I'll let you take the lead.
Okay, thanks. No, it won't be mandatory for our athletes on the high performance squad to play in these events. It will be highly encouraged that they do. Our athletes fill out a yearly training plan, and they are very busy with their IST or meetings, their team meetings, training, competitions. Who knows, there could be an international competition like there is this year. We have World Bowls conflicting with our Canadian championships. So to make it mandatory, it's not going to happen. But when we look at the yearly training plan of our athletes and say, well, you got some time off here in August, maybe you should be playing in those. We would encourage them to do so. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, coming from the national team player perspective, when I hear those kind of comments or read them, I think the underlying notion there is what, are you scared to play us, or why won't you play a national championship? Ultimately, as someone who loves lawn bowling, I will play a lawn bowling tournament every opportunity I can get. So if I choose to not play in the national championship, or another national team member doesn't play in that, it's probably not because they're scared to play or anything like that, but ultimately we do balance a pretty busy training schedule, competition schedule on the international side. And then also we have to do full-time work, school, or whatever our outside passions are. So sometimes you have to make hard choices, and that means that you don't get to play in your national format. But ultimately, if you can play, at least speaking for myself, I'm always going to be there if I get the opportunity.
Perfect. Good answers. I want to loop back just to the five-a-side thing. There might be just some repetition or some clarification that we'll need. Will qualifiers for the new National Five-a-Side Championship in 2024 need to be filled by a qualifying five-a-side team? So you have to enter as a team provincially, qualify as a team provincially as five-a-side, and you go with that same team, correct?
Correct.
A lot of nodding, yeah, everybody. Perfect. Okay. So So Anna, there have been a number of posts about people seeing these changes and wanting to leave bowls. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, those posts for sure have been really disheartening. I know change is really scary. I know that whenever we were forced in life to try something new, it can be really hard, and it's harder for some than others. So I really do appreciate that. I think that the opportunity is going to be fun. I think it's going to be fast. I think it's going to be, a game that people will enjoy playing. So I really hope that this isn't what drives people away from the game. But on the other hand, I do understand that not everybody wants to change. So I do appreciate and respect that.
Before we go into a little bit of wrap up, we've been on for an hour and 40 minutes, believe it or not. That's a long time. Just a couple questions. From Peter Mock, would BCB conduct a survey to find out the number of for and against for this new format in all of Canada?
Can I jump in? I think that survey should only happen after we get a chance to see it. I think it's kind of sitting on the outside and looking in. I really hope people give this an opportunity, but if you're going to leave or vote against it without actually seeing how this is going to work and play out, it's not really a fair opportunity to the format that 18 people who know the sport, play different hats in it, and took a real serious consideration over quite a long period with a lot of research. I think that this is worth at least trying for the bowls community, and I'd ask that the bowls community at least give this a shot, but before we vote yes or no on it.
All right. Bob Seltzer, he had asked us previously, and I hadn't had a chance to get to it, but to make this new Canadian Championship more meaningful, I think we addressed this in another question, but shouldn't the winners of the national team shouldn't the winners of the Canadians be the national team for the upcoming year?
Yeah, I think we did address that. I mean, part of this is a numbers game, right? And when we look at a sport that is the size of bowls in Canada, so we have just over 13,000 members, the odds of that one team having the very best lead and the very best skip and the very best middle players is not good. And when Australia, who's much stronger depth-wise than us, they don't select their national teams that way. And what's really interesting is, there's a lot of chatter about curling. That's what curling does. But curling's format is likely going to change. They've just brought in a new high performance director from out of Canada, and they're undergoing a massive review because curling is no longer the powerhouse that they used to be. And this is one of the things that they're looking at. So at the moment, we really don't have the numbers to support that. The other thing that a lot of people don't realize, and Rob alluded to it and Ryan alluded to it as well, is a commitment that our national team players take. And so we've seen this quite often in the youth championships, where somebody wins an event and they don't appreciate the amount of work that goes into being on a national team. And that's simply, that's no disrespect for anybody, but it's not for everyone to give up and sacrifice all of the things that the current national team players do. So as Ryan said, there is an expression of interest that goes out, and that expression of interest really lays out, here's all the things that you need to be available for. Here's all the things you need to do. Here's all the costs that you're expected to pay over the next year or 2 years. So when you put all of that together, it becomes really difficult to then say that the winner of this championship is going to be those 5 people who are willing to do all of those things for all the time, give up all of their free time to go do that.
Cody Cody Olthoff in the chat. Have there been thoughts of getting some sort of TV contract with a local company for the Nationals to get more eyes on the sport, as this will be more watchable and fit into a TV schedule easier?
So part of my research of talking to other countries between Australia, New Zealand, and a few others of what they're doing for broadcasting has been very enlightening for me on where we can move forward with this. Absolutely, streaming is the future for us for the moment, just to get more eyeballs. Part of what Anna alluded to before is that being able to invest in better equipment. So whether that's us purchasing equipment, or whether that's us hiring it out to an external company, or whether that's us working with the local news company. For those of you who were in Burlington in 2019 and 2022, they had the local news company come down to stream the finals, which was great. But there's been a lot that I've learned through interviewing other countries, and I plan to implement those as we go forward, because you're absolutely right. This is a very stream-friendly format, and we hope to capitalize on that.
I just want to quickly scour this to see. David Lewis again. Why not trial these changes before full implementation? Test out some of these questions that we have and work together on making a new format.
Can I say a little bit about the financial struggles? Coming out of a pandemic, most PSOs have been struggling, last year being very difficult to fund. One province shared with us that they were close to 6 figures in the hole from trying to fund people to go to national championships. So the current model does not work going forward. We're going to bankrupt our provinces, and that's not something that we want to see happen. And it's also not sustainable for us either. So trying to piecemeal this of still doing the status quo and try something new at the same time, that just makes it even more unsustainable on what's already an unsustainable model. So while in theory it would have been nice to pilot some things before going full on into it, the reality is if the longer we wait, the sooner to death some of these provincial associations might be.
Right. Just as a closing question, I hope we covered the majority of your questions in chat, and those that I was able to scour and pick out of Facebook and other threads and posts. We hope you got a lot of information out of this, but I wanted to open it up to any closing remarks. Basically, what are the anticipated next steps, and is there anything that Anna, you wanted to say, or anybody wanted to say to our viewers before we sign off for the night?
Jake, did you want to talk about immediate next steps with respect to the development committee? And
Sure. So our development committee has a lot of work cut out for them. So between creating the conditions of play for how provinces are going to be able to run these play downs, as I said earlier, the plan is to get these out before the end of May, so that way any province who wants to run these a year in advance could still do so this summer. So that's step number one. But then there's also creating a bid package. So there's a big sport event congress coming up in June, where every city's tourism body comes together to learn what events are up for bidding on from all sports, basically. So we want to make sure that our event is included in there. So that means we need to have a bid package ready to go before then. And then after that, we still need to work on the evaluation metrics for how we're going to evaluate bidders, the evaluation metrics for the event as a whole, and then, of course, the national conditions of play as well. So there's a lot of work to do to be done. The immediate next steps right now is to get those provincial guidelines out so that way provinces can run their pay downs whenever they feel they're ready for them.
Anybody else with closing remarks? Thoughts?
Well, I'll close and just say that coming out of this, of when we made these changes, I left, Saturday night, I would say there was a moment of like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? And then Sunday, when we started to kind of see this format appear and come to some sort of consensus as a group, I was super excited to see it. Obviously, the change is scary, and I've definitely had my moments of like, oh my goodness, what have we done? But ultimately, I'm super excited to see what this does for the sport. And I hope that everyone just gives it an opportunity, looks for what the opportunities are ahead, and not just what's been taken away, because there is a lot of opportunity and a lot of room for growth in our sport. And I think this is a really good thing for it.
Thank you, Rob. And Cam says your hair looks fresh, so there's your compliment to send you off for the evening. I want to thank everybody. It's been roughly 2 hours of conversation from start to finish, questions and information. If you didn't get all the information that you need, the link to the Bulls Canada website with the format and a fact that hopefully will help you out a little bit is still there. If you have really super important questions, remember to talk to your provincial association, and you can send them in to, I'm sure, Bulls Canada for some answers. I wanted to say thank you to Anna, Jake, Rob, Ryan, and Tammy for coming on and answering all these questions. It's not an easy job, especially when the questions are coming in chat rapid fire as well. So thank you very much, you guys. I want to say thank you for Bulls, for the Canadian Bowler channel. Thank you for joining. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll do my shameless plug right now. Tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern time, Mike Batuli and I will be running our podcast as usual. We'll be discussing a whole bunch of news from over the last few weeks. We've kind of postponed our podcast. We'll be talking about, World Bowls teams being announced, multi-nations and Oceania results, which is kind of cool. Some really interesting teams coming out of New Zealand and that area and Oceania. And obviously, we'll be talking about this show. So if you want to come and chat some more about it tomorrow, come and join us. The link will be out shortly, and we hope to see you there. So thank you, everybody. Have a great night. And for everybody here, good night.
Thanks, Darryl. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Darryl.
Thanks, guys.
Good night, everyone.